Welcome to Down to Earth but Heavenly Minded podcast. Hosted by Irving Risch. Light and Life Meditations on the Gospel and Epistles of John. By James Boyd. 8. John chapter 6. The bread of God come down from heaven is the subject of chapter 6. The Lord had fed 5,000 men with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And the people felt that a man who could do a thing like this was not one to be lightly rejected. To have such an one as this for a king would mean that the sweat of the brow and the anxiety of the mind for daily food need exist no longer. He is certainly the prophet that should come into the world, and they had better make him king at once. But not into the hands of the fickle crowd would he who knew what was in man commit himself. He goes into the mountain to pray. He will take the place of the priest on high, the place he took up when rejected from the earth, and the place he now occupies. The crowd who had seen the miracle make diligent search for him, for in their present mind, to lose him was to lose an opportunity such as had never previously been presented to them. To escape from the toil with which the children of Adam have to earn their bread has ever been the ambition of the human race. Hence the supposed ease and comfort of the rich have always aroused the envy and cupidity of those who have a constant struggle to make ends meet. Not seeing that often the weight of the drudgery is less than the anxieties that wealth is sure to bring with it. It is impossible for the heart estranged from God to believe that only in the knowledge of himself is true happiness to be found. Yet in thy presence is fullness of joy. Here only is the cup made to run over. Here only is bliss unspeakable to be realized. What a change must necessarily pass over the mind of the poor wandering Israelite, when in the coming day, the day in which God shall set his hand toward the recovery of his earthly people. The cry shall be wrung from his awakened soul, as the hart panteth after the water brooks, so panteth my soul after thee, O God. My soul thirsteth for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? Psalm chapter 42. At this present moment his heart is set upon the fugacious riches of the nations, among which he is shunned as a leper. And this must continue until the day arrive when the deliverance shall come from the presence of the Lord, and their heart shall turn to him whom they have so long despised, rebelled against, and forgotten. And then shall their profitless wanderings, their many transgressions, and their soul-destroying folly, like mountains rise before their weeping eyes, and once again shall the heart of the nation repose in the favor of the God of their fathers. Then shall the Gentiles also rejoice with that favored nation. Ye seek me, not because ye saw the miracles, but because ye did eat of the loaves, and were filled. Labor not for the meat which perisheth, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you. For him has God the Father sealed. Into this life of flesh and blood sin has come, and death by sin, and this present state of our existence is not to be continued. The individual may escape the winged arrow of death for 60 years and 10, perhaps 80, or even 1,000, if it pleased God, but the end must come, for death lies upon every child of Adam's race. Why, then, be over anxious as to our present condition of existence, which on account of sin must be brought to a termination? The living creatures of the sea, and of the earth, along with the herb of the field, may be made to contribute to the building up of our mortal flesh. And even the food of angels might be laid upon our table, but none of these can give us immunity from death's dread power, and bid the king of terrors stay his hand. If there can be found bread in the universe that is able to place us beyond the might of death, then let us wholeheartedly set our minds and hearts to the possession of this. And for this let everything else be sacrificed. Why should we be so greatly concerned about the bread that perishes, when the bread that endures to everlasting life is within the reach of our appropriation? This is the bread that comes down from heaven, that a man may eat thereof, and not die. And this living bread was here in the midst of this death-doomed nation. And yet the bread that perishes was the thing that occupied their whole thought. Here was something better than the tree of life that grew in Eden, which could do no more than sustain the life of flesh and blood. And only as long as the innocent creature was true to the interdiction imposed upon him by his beneficent Creator. This bread was the free gift of God the Father, and was for the life of the world. The failure of the creature could bring down no cherubim with flaming sword to keep the transgressor at a distance. This was given in the grace of the Father's heart, and was for the appropriation of those whose sins had brought upon them the judgment of death. It was not sent down from heaven for the deserving, but for those who deserved nothing from the hand of divine justice but wrath and condemnation. It was here for the starving and lost sinners of the race of Adam, and for all alike. It was also for the Gentile as truly as for the Jew, for it was for the life of the world. I am that bread of life. In their blindness and hardness of heart they demand a sign, that through him God had intervened on their behalf, with himself as that sign before their eyes. Bread had been rained down from heaven for the sustenance of their fathers in the desert, and what more had Christ done than that? Only this, that the manna did not place those who ate it beyond the reach of death, but here was the bread that comes down from heaven, that a man may eat thereof, and not die, and Jesus himself was that bread, and the Father was the giver of it. But they had seen him and had not believed in him. As presented to their responsibility, and to be appropriated by them, he was not according to their liking, and therefore was he criticized, contradicted and rejected. That their fathers ate manna in the desert might have been supposed by them to be still casting a kind of luster upon the rebellious nation. But if the angels' food did not make them proof against the weapon of death, and if now they refused to appropriate the living bread in which was life everlasting, what then was left for them but eternal destitution? And what was God to do when his Son was rejected? Is the poor rebellious worm of the dust to effect his own eternal ruin, and is the guilty race to perish forever? All that the Father gives me shall come to me. The fulfillment of his eternal counsels are not to be subjected to the accident of man's acceptance of the one in whom those counsels are centered. No man can come to me, except the Father which has sent me draw him. So antagonistic to God is the mind of the natural man that only by universal rejection would his word be met. But the resources of God are infinite, and he has his own way of bringing to pass the beneficent thoughts of his own heart of love. His plans can never be wrecked by the malevolence of the creature, nor can the tranquility of the Almighty be in the least disturbed by the opposition of a world of rebels. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Psalm chapter 2 verse 4. In the end it shall be seen that he has always triumphed, and that the self-will of the sinner has resulted only in his own confusion. It is written in the prophets, and they shall be all taught of God. Every man therefore that has heard, and has learned of the Father, comes unto me. If no man can come, unless the Father draw him, every one that has been drawn of the Father comes. God must be supreme in his own creation, and either in eternal happiness, or in eternal misery, must this fact be realized by every intelligent being in the universe. Man may rage against the doings of the Almighty, and dispute his ways in the world that he has made, and thus manifest the madness of his corrupt fallen nature, but he does it to his own everlasting disadvantage, and to his unending sorrow. Happy is the man that gladly submits to the ways of God, even when griefs seem to gather upon his pathway, and this valley of the shadow of death seems crowded with unspeakable evils. The believer is in the hand of the Father, and in the hand of the Son, and his body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, and could he be more secure in heaven itself? But while it is true that no one can come to Jesus apart from the drawing of the Father, it is also true that it is the will of the Father that everyone that sees the Son and believes on him may have everlasting life, and that the Son will raise him up at the last day. It is not only the Jew who may partake of this life. It is as true of the Gentile who sees the Son and believes on him. He is the bread that comes down from heaven, and gives life to the world. The manna came down from heaven for Israel only, for it was the means by which God sustained them throughout their wilderness journey. But the living bread was not to be confined to one nation, it was free for all. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If any man eat of this bread he will live forever. And the bread that I will give is my flesh which I will give for the life of the world. But this only raises a new difficulty, and they say, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? Had they only seen how utterly hopeless their state under the law was, and how their position under the Roman power bore witness to it, they might have been better able to understand the voices of the prophets, and the testimony which they bore to the sufferings of Christ on their behalf, and the word of Jesus would not, perhaps, have appeared to them such a hard saying. But in the pride of their hearts they imagined their relations with him were all that they should be. And the idea of the necessity of a ransom for their souls was a thing that never was allowed a place in their minds.